Welcome, everyone, to another exciting adventure and journey on riding through the unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight's guest is someone I'm excited to bring on. She's bringing a topic I have not really got a lot of clarity to and haven't had really on the show before, so I'm excited to have her on to share her knowledge and experiences with us. And so I have to admit, too, we've been having a lot of fun talking backstage, getting ready for this. So I can definitely say you all are in for a huge treat with this guest. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the one, the only, mystical extraordinaire, Cassandra Raven.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so cool to be here. And what an amazing intro that was. How exciting.
Thank you.
So my name's Cassandra Raven, and I live in England in the UK, and I am a Kabbalist. Now, the first question that people usually ask me is, what is Kabbalah? And I studied Kabbalah for 25 years. It's more of a mysticism sort of journey, a self-development journey than anything else. It's not a religion. In fact, anybody can study it, anybody can use Kabbalah, and it's just an incredible topic. And everything is included in Kabbalah. So we've got tarot, we've got astrology, we've got numerology, we've got sacred geometry, we've got all kinds of different topics, all kind of crammed into one umbrella term, which is Kabbalah. So it's a super exciting topic to talk about. I teach Kabbalah, and also I use Kabbalah with my clients in my coaching as well. So it's something that you can come to me and learn, and it's something that you can come to me as a client, and I will use it as a tool to help you.
That is really cool. And I, self-taught myself a lot of metaphysics, which is the term I use, saying I'm metaphysical. But from the way you described it, it sounds like I'm actually a Kabbalist and just never knew it.
Yeah, it's surprising when people say, "Oh, well, I'm into these topics. I'm into this same stuff." And this is where it gets super exciting, because when I start to tell people about the tree of life, which is the image or the map that we use that's central to the Kabbalistic teachings, the tree of life is like a map of yourself, your own energetics, your own physical body, but it's also a map of the universe. So what we're doing is we're traversing spirit planes, and we're visiting places in the spirit planes as we walk the paths on the map. We visit certain temples, we visit certain places, and each place has its own theme or its own world. And in each of those places, we learn something about ourselves, depending on the theme of that world, if you like. So it's kind of like having a map for the spiritual journey, for your own spiritual progress, for your own self-development, but also if you want to manifest something, if you want to experience something, if you want some knowledge or you want communication with certain beings, you know where to go to on that map to be able to commune on that level or with those particular beings that are connected to a particular subject to gain knowledge in those different topics. So Kabbalah encompasses everything. So it's really hard to explain in one sentence. But basically, because we've got this map, it means that we have our journey mapped out for us. And with that structure, with the logic and the structure in place, it means that we can go wild with the spirituality, because we know where we are when it comes to using the spirit planes, navigating the spirit planes, and energetically as well. So we can look at the past, we can look at the future, but we can also look at alternate timelines and tune into those as well. So yeah, it's a wild trip when you get involved in it. But so many people come to me and say, I'm so confused. Where do I start? How do I begin? What's the simplest way to start? Because every book goes really deep, really quick, and it gets very complex very fast. So I like to keep things simple for people, and I like to pace people through it so that they can follow the system really easily. And within that, you get so much freedom in your own spiritual experiences, but it's all done in a safe way.
I agree, and I'm probably about to just contradict myself with my next question for you, because to me, I feel like I'm about to dive right into the deep end. And that is, I know from experiences, I've given my mom, when she was around, the Tree of Life necklace, or have a shirt with the Tree of Life on it. And then I went to Egypt, and at first my mind was like, yeah, Egypt is all about the Tree of Life. It's even in the Obscurian. And then I realized, no, that's the flower of life is in Egypt. And so, is there a big difference in energy and symbolism of the flower of life from the tree of life, or are they?
I'm so excited that you're asking this. So this is the tree of life. I don't know if you can see this. So we have this diagram with 10 circles on it and 22 paths. So that's the tree of life that I'm referring to. So rather than a tree that looks like an oak tree, or, you know, a sort of earthly tree, when I talk about the tree of life, it's that diagram. But contained within this diagram, we have 10 circles. And the circle at the very top represents the purest spiritual energy that you can possibly imagine. Some people call it God, some people call it universal energy. Doesn't matter what you call it, it's just the purest form of energy you can imagine. And then right at the bottom, we've got Earth, our planet Earth, and the physical world that we occupy. And the journey that that energy goes through from the very top of the tree of life all the way down to us at the bottom that's how things manifest. That's how physical manifestation happens. So from the essence of energy all the way through that process, going through those 10 circles, it's refined, it's given form, it's given the energy that it has, and then manifests here in the physical. And within that tree of life diagram, those 10 circles on there, those are worlds that we can go into, but each one is infinitely deep. So when it comes to symbology, when it comes to other cultures, when it comes to any kind of symbolic knowledge, whether it's Eastern symbology or Western symbology or anything else, inside this tree of life is contained all the symbology. So this is why we say it's a philosophy, it's not a religion. But most belief systems actually fit onto the tree. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at Egyptian, it doesn't matter if you're looking at Hebrew, it doesn't matter if you're looking at Christianity, you know, all of it will fit onto the tree in one way or another because it's a philosophy. So when it comes to any kind of symbology, yes, the tree of life gives us sort of compartments that we can place things into. So we can say this part of the tree is to do with the thoughts and how we think and how we communicate and logic. Another part of the tree is about our emotions and how we receive, how we're artistic, how we express ourselves. Another part of the tree is to do with the ego. And when we rise above the ego, we get further up the tree. When we move into the soul realms, there are certain topics that we look at there. And then we move into the spiritual, really high up on the tree, where we're looking at things like masculine energy, feminine energy, and everything in between. So, you know, we get these opposites, but we get all the energy between those opposites as well. So when we divide the tree top to bottom, you get really abstract energy right at the top. and physical energy, that things you can feel and touch and experience with your five senses, right at the bottom. And then in between, we get the spirit worlds, we get the subconscious, we get the ego, we get the thoughts, the feelings. Then we get the sort of sacrifices that we have to make, the bigger picture when we start to teach and spread our word. And then things like justice and scary stuff like that, when we have to stand up for ourselves. All of teaching when it comes to being human and what it is to be human is within the tree. So everything's in there. So you could pick any symbol and it would fit onto the tree. And I've seen people on TikTok saying, oh, the tree of life isn't a complete image because you could add circles here, here, and here, and here. And, it's kind of like, well, yeah, you could. But the way that we do this is that inside each of those circles are more infinite trees. So it's like a giant gobstopper, those sweets where you just, you sort of, you got it there and there's layers and layers and layers, like an onion, just infinite layers within each of those 10 circles. And you choose how deep you want to go into each one. So you can just dip your toe in and say, oh yeah, okay, I understand the energy of this particular thing and how I work with it and how it affects my life and how I experience this in my life. Or you can go even deeper and say, what are my problems with this type of energy? Where do I struggle when it comes to communication? Where do I struggle when it comes to my thoughts? Where's my Mercury in my birth chart? Where is my planetary placement of Mercury? And how does that work in my life? So this is how the astrology works in it as well. And we can put so many different types of teachings within this process. And that's what's so magical about it for me, is I studied so many different things over the years. I studied Reiki, I did healing, tarot, obviously, astrology, lots of different things. And all of those are separate facets that all fit into this. And when you know where everything fits, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I get it now. Here's my understanding about crystals, for example, or here's my understanding about numerology. It all fits into the tree of life, and it's all there. There's nothing missing in it. And which is why I don't give myself any other titles. I don't call myself a psychic or a medium or a healer or even a protector or anything like that. Some teachings do have grades in them. So you work your way up the grades and you go through an initiation and you go through ceremonial practices linked to Kabbalah. But to say I'm a Kabbalist sums everything up and says, I'm using a bit of everything that works for me. And there are aspects of it that don't work for me, that I don't do. And you'll find another Kabbalist that says, oh, I work with only demonic energy. That's all I work with, or I work with, just the tarot, but it's Kabbalistic tarot. So you can go as deep as you want to go with it. You can go in lots of different directions with it. And that's what's so exciting about it.
That's really cool. And as you were describing the tree, I got this vision because, I have Norse blood in me. And for the life of me, I don't speak it, but I'll do my best, is Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
The sacred ash tree of the 9 realms.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were describing, the tree of life and its different facets and worlds attached to it, I was like, that sounds like Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
And so I just was curious if you were aware of that through mythology, because you were talking about Egyptian and focusing over there, and I was curious if other cultures also pick up and have their symbolism in there some way.
Absolutely. And people often say, this is very much like my culture or my understanding of energy or understanding of religion. People often say, oh yeah, this makes sense with me. It fits with what I already know. And I think that's what's so beautiful about this the tree of life and the system that I use is that it doesn't matter your background or where you're from. It makes sense. And when you look back into where Kabbalah came from, if you trace it far back as we know, as far back as we're aware, through historical context, but also through spiritual context, the sort of origin is that it was given to Isis, and she was able to then impart the information to her people. So there is that Egyptian sort of link to it. And then any sort of female that comes through Kabbalistic teachings, we are linked, many of us are linked with what we call the Isis line. So it's that line of teaching that's come down. But the fact that it works with so many other belief systems and so many other cultures, it really says to me that it's so universal, and I can talk about the sacrificed God, which is at the center of the tree of life. We talk about sacrificing the ego, sacrificing what no longer works for you, and understanding that that's part of you, but that you don't have to live within it or focus on it. You can grow beyond the things that aren't necessarily working for you or aren't good for you. And that process, as you develop spiritually, as you grow through life, we talk about, okay, you make those decisions in your life at some point. Maybe all that drinking's not so good for me anymore. Maybe I'll cut down on that, or maybe I'll cut down on those bad habits a little bit. That's the sort of sacrifice that you make in order to have a better life. But you can also look at that as the sacrificed God, and there are so many beliefs that have a sacrificed God. You can trace it across the story of this energy that is sacrificed and then reborn as something new, as something different. And I think that it's so important, especially in modern times, to stay connected to those stories, stay connected to those myths and those beliefs, because even if we don't follow strictly, for example, Christianity, I take that because it's a very popular, thing, very popular topic. Even if we don't believe in the traditions and the beliefs and perhaps the church side of it, when we look at it energetically, it's very interesting that we see, okay, we've got a sacrifice God here. We've got the idea of placing our faith, our belief in something that can redeem us, in something external to us that can redeem us. Lots of people operate that way. Lots of people look to a god or a goddess or another being in some way. But again, you don't have to follow this. All you need to really understand is energy, and knowing that there's something bigger than us. There's something external to us that is also part of us. And then knowing that we can work with those energies, whether they are gods, goddesses, no matter what sort of historical context you've got or spiritual belief that you have, it's really all very similar. The stories are very similar, and we're taught these things so that we can progress through our lives, so that we can hear these things and say, how do I fit into that? How does that work for me? And I think that's the key to all of these beliefs. I don't consider myself any particular religion, but I'm a Kabbalist. So I understand the stories, I understand the myths, I understand why we need to continue these stories and these myths, because they apply to us in our lives. So whether it's Norse or, it doesn't matter what it is, we need that. We really need that. And we need it more now than I think we did 5-10 years ago, because everybody's walking their own path. And we're all discovering, we're all searching, we're all curious, right? So we're all kind of, what's that about? What is that energy, and what is that weird thing I experienced, and what is that thing I can feel but nobody talks about? What is that, and without necessarily having to be religious, this is where the path is starting to unfold for us now. And I think it's so important. And I always say to everybody that comes to me, go and explore. Go and find out more. Take your own path. Like, this is a framework, but it's not necessarily right for everyone. And it means that you can explore it. just try it out, just give it a go, and then step outside of it. And more than anything, be a heretic. That's always my message to everyone is, we're all on our own paths, and it's up to you to find that foundation, to find what works for you, but then stretch the limits a bit, explore a bit, be daring a little bit, take a little bit of a risk if you feel safe to do so. Really see where you fit into those stories, into those myths, into those beliefs. And it's so important that we do that we develop our own strength and our own ability. Don't just believe what someone tells you. Understand it, really integrate it within you, and then explore.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we're talking about like the ideal of the sacrifice God, and you went into, you brought up Christianity. I was thinking about it and going, I could think of at least two for Christianity. And it's just surprising. And it's the fact, too, that, I also wonder, is it because a lot of these faiths are really all coming from one singular source? They just took what they needed to fit their narrative and created their religion, and other religions took what they needed and created their version. And so is that why like the Kabbalistic view is so prevalent and everything, is because it's going to the source versus all the little segments or branches of the source?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the basic framework that most beliefs are centered around is, you have the Abrahamic beliefs. They are all really singing from the same book. But interestingly, what I've seen with Kabbalah is there was and I need to research this better, but I'm gonna say it because it's relevant. But there was an island, a really remote island somewhere, with people living on this island, and they had the same framework. It was given to them somehow, and yet this was an untouched society, an untouched tribe, and they had the same system. They spoke about these worlds that they would, and you get it a lot in journeying and shamanic practices, things like that as well. And it's where people are very aware that the physical world isn't the whole story. And I think that when you get in touch with that side of yourself and that side of life that is not entirely physical, when we look at the tree of life, only the bottom one is physical. Everything above that is beyond the physical realm. So there's so much there to explore and experience. And people say to me, well, what about aliens? And what about, the star people? And, what about these different people who say that they're from different planets and, all of this? And it's kind of like, well, yes, we study all of that within this. These are truths that are within there. And there's really not much that's not possible, if you see what I mean. I've heard crazy theories and insane things that people have said, and I've thought, it's really brave of people to say the things that they're saying, but I can map it on the tree. So it makes sense to me what they're saying. And I might not have experienced what they've experienced or seen what they've seen or spoken to the energy that they've communed with or seen where they're from or where they claim to be from. However, I can map it on the tree so I can understand it. So I can say, okay, that belongs there. And that's part of that understanding. And energetically, that's where it fits. So who am I to question what somebody else is saying? And I think that's a big part of it as well, to always be flexible. Because if I was to say, oh, this is my way and it's the only right way, and I know the truth and it's the only truth, then that will be extremely close-minded. And I just couldn't possibly be like that. So like you, I love to hear other people's experiences, and the weirder the better, the more wonderful the better, especially when it comes from someone who clearly, truly believes in what they've experienced, and what they are experiencing within their life. It's fascinating.
Right.
So this is a framework, Kabbalah as a framework, because everything fits into it. Everything in the universe fits into it, compartmentalized and put in its energetic place. It means that anything that anyone says, I can say, oh yeah, that's there on the tree. And so I don't doubt anything that anybody says, and I don't poo-poo anything that anybody else says, because it all fits into this framework. But when you apply the framework and you start to use it, that's when everything in your life just explodes, because you're able to then say, right, well, I want to achieve this, or I want to be more like this, or I want to go here or do this with my life. Then you map that onto the tree and you've got the map to get there immediately. So it works in so many different ways. But you're right, it's so interesting to see other people say, oh, that makes sense with what I already know. And people say that to me all the time.
Is it the North Sentinel Island that you're referring to? The untouched island?
I can't remember which one it was, unfortunately. I need to look into it and have a look. But it's a long time since I looked into it. But they definitely have the same, the same system.
Yeah, because that one's in the Indian Ocean, and I was looking one day and wanted to make sure I spoke the right name, so I looked it up while you were talking, and it's been untouched by European civilizations for 60,000 years.
Wow.
Because anybody who would approach, they would be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I was like, I wonder if this is the same island.
Well, the idea behind it is that this information, or this sort of structure, or teaching, if you like, it's given to people, and not just a particular group of people. It's been channeled or passed to different people around the world. And it's really interesting when you look at something like symbology, and you look at, for example, the elemental symbology. So when we look at the four main elements, you're looking at air, earth, fire, and water. And almost every culture will say these are the building blocks of life. We've just come to understand it. And it's also really interesting when you look at things like alchemy and our understanding of the sun and the moon and the planets and day and night and, opposites and energetics. You get it all in there, and cycles. We're all inherently knowledgeable about that, because it's to do with our survival. If we didn't understand the cycles, if we didn't understand the seasons, we couldn't survive. And so when you tie all this in with the symbology that we're always using, that we're always tuned into and connected to naturally, then you start to kind of say, well, really, this is a knowing. And anytime I talk about this with other people, it's like they're remembering, and they kind of go, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, that makes sense to me, and I start talking about astrology, and astrology makes sense to people because we don't know how it works. Ultimately, we don't know how it works. Yet, no matter how you flavor it or package it, there are waves of energy that are coming from outer space, hitting the earth, and we either ride those waves or we try to swim against those waves, but they're waves of energy all the same. And it is happening, and it's up to us to understand the patterns and to understand that energy and work with it rather than working against it.
I agree, and it's interesting too, is I wonder, because I've come to learn there's 5 elements to humanity in our building blocks, because there's the ether, or as the Chinese call the chi, or there's the spirit element that comes into play. And also, as you talk about like astrology being essential What about the, I can never pronounce this because it's Greek, but the Ophiuchus?
Oh,
I
the
hope I'm,
13th sign. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Well, this is great. We need to question these things and we need to say, does this system still work? Now, the fact that we use 12 signs and 12 houses works really well. And you can argue until you're blue in the face with people who use a different house system and a different, there's so many different astrological systems that you can use. And it's one of these things, again, where you kind of go and look into it, go and research it, and use what works for you. If it makes sense for you and it's all slotting into place for you, stick with that system. If you then step out of that and say, well, what about this? What about this extra sign that, there's so many extra constellations. What about if we look at when the sun is in this constellation or this sign? What happens then? Well, then the people who are starting to use that, starting to incorporate that, that'll be the next thing in the next generation and the next generation that is taken into consideration. How does that work? It wasn't until, fairly recently that we started working with the outer planets, because previous to that, we only had knowledge of a certain amount of planets because they were closer to us. When we could look into the sky, we could see further planets. Suddenly it was like, well, hang on, there's more energies there. And now people are also incorporating different stars that we are discovering, asteroids that we're discovering. It's kind of like, oh, now there's all this other energy that's going on. How can we understand it? What does it do? How does it affect us? So I use the 12 sign system and the 12 house system because it works for me. And I use the equal house system because that's what works for me. But lots of other people work in different ways, and they find if that works for them, then that works for them. Again, it's one of these things, and it's like, pick a tarot deck that works for you. You've got to pick the thing that you are attracted to, that works for you, and that you can prove that it works for you. Don't just take it because somebody says it. Test it out, try it, experiment with it. And that's the real work. When you start to use this stuff, so many people can read about it, leave that book on the shelf, and then, spout all the chat GPT about it. But if you're not using it and trying it and experimenting with it and making mistakes with it, then what's the point? So I always tell everyone to just go ahead, explore, try it, and see if it works.
And what I find interesting is because in the Chinese zodiac, if I'm not mistaken, there is the snake, but the snake is not in the 12 zodiac because it was the 13th symbol is the snake. I was just looking it up and something struck me as I was thinking about it, going, the snake. And then I was like, the never ending story. The medallion, the Orin, wasn't snake, circling around and ended up biting its own tail, so to speak. And so I am like, my mind starts going, wait a minute, am I like connecting dots here? And the Chinese never gave up the 13th symbol. They gave up a different symbol by keeping the snake. And so, could that be said for other astrologies that they we didn't eliminate all the same symbol. We eliminated a different symbol across the board so that everybody was still 12, but there was no set unifying factor that said, yep, we're getting rid of this symbol. Everybody's on the same page, right? Great.
It's one of those things where I love so many aspects to that. I think there's a lot of occult symbology in the never-ending story, but also interesting that the 13 and the snake, because now we're into why is 13 unlucky? Why is the snake considered bad? And suddenly now you're a Kabbalist. Because piecing all of these things, like taking all of these different things and saying, oh, that's interesting. That's what makes someone a Kabbalist. That's what makes someone go, okay, so the number 13 has this connotation. The snake has this connotation. Why is that? Why is it that we consider this to be negative or bad or unlucky in some way? And then making these connections. So a really good way to do it with the tree of life is to look at this part of the tree here, the red circle. And I usually say to people, you know, what do you think of when you think about the color red? What do you think of?
I think of roses, blood, purity, love, and also battle. You know, battle is in there too.
Yeah.
But honor, you know, the usual stuff.
Right. So people say blood, passion, danger, you know, your stop sign, or your red is like stop. It's a warning, right? A warning sign. As you say, battle. These are really good words, you know, all of that stuff. So in the tree of life, we have the planet Mars associated with the red circle, and Mars is the planet of war, but it's also the planet of justice. So when it comes to that part of the tree and experiencing that part of the tree, you're looking at all of those things within your life and within yourself, everything connected to the color red and that Mars symbol. It's all categorized in that one world that we can visit. Now, for me, in my personal astrological birth chart, my Mars is really badly placed. It's one of the worst planet placements in my chart. So when I got to that part of the tree, when I was being initiated into those parts, that part of the tree was so difficult for me, because Mars energy is very difficult for me to deal with. I'm very anti-war. I'm anti-conflict. I don't like war. I don't like conflict. I don't even like passion that much. You know, I'm very sort of, you know, I'm passionate about some things, but I wouldn't call myself a quick to anger person, or, you know, extremely passionate about lots of things. And when we look at all of the symbology that goes into that one circle, and you start to piece everything together, and you say, okay, so we've got all these things. How do I experience that in my life? How does that all show up in my life? And then what happened for me to work through that energy at the time that I was deep into that study and initiating into that energy, I found myself in a situation where I was physically attacked by someone, and I was faced with a choice. I could stand up for myself. I could take this to court. I could go the whole way, or I could just be a victim and let this thing affect me. And so I chose to fight. I realized that this was my moment to use that Mars energy in my life to make sure that I was going through the justice system, to make sure that I was standing up for myself, that I was healing myself, and that I was activating that Mars energy for myself. And so I ended up in this 4.5-year court battle to make sure that this person was, justice was served. And I ended up, of course, everything was fine in the end. But through that process, I had so much healing to do around my Mars energy, and, you know, everything that fit into it, all of the sort of masculine energy that I had never really wanted to face or sort of integrate into my life, that I found so difficult for me. That was my time to change all of that energy and to go through that. So things aren't always that extreme when you're working with the tree of life, but that's a really good example of understanding the energetics of it, and understanding when you're given the opportunity to make a choice to transmute that energy for yourself, to make something different of it. None of the other circles that I visited were anywhere near as stressful or difficult or, sort of as life-changing really as that one particular one was. Usually people sort of breeze through and they say, oh yeah, I understand this about me. And yeah, I get that. And yeah, I understand it. Something little might crop up to test you or to give you an opportunity to transmute the energy, and then you move on, you move through it. That one had me for 4.5 years, and that was a real humdinger. But I knew that I had to get through it in order to be able to teach it, to be able to help other people to go through in that level of depth as well. So that's an example of part of the tree and the sort of things that we experience and face as we go through the journey of the tree of life. So for me, it's been a 25-year journey so far, and you're always somewhere on the tree. So I was initiated through all 10 of the Sephiroth and then all 22 of the paths back down. So I worked my way up and then worked my way down. And then you find that wherever you are in life, whatever topic you're dealing with, whatever situation you're dealing with, whatever's coming up is somewhere on the tree. So you can always say, okay, this thing is happening in my life now. I'm going to take myself to that particular part of the tree. I'm going to visualize myself in that temple, talking to those energies, communing with those forces that exist there. And they give you the help, the advice. You build up relationships with them. And it's a living thing. So you're always somewhere on the tree.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, as we're talking about, like you were struggling with Mars energies. And one of the facets that I think about that when I deal with Mars energy myself, being of the justice, is watching that I don't cross the line of justice to revenge to vendetta to, because it's so easy to go off course because you're doing what everybody is saying you need to do. And so I feel like, that's something that a lot of people, will sit there and, they'll be like, I can't let this go because justice needs to be done. But there's a difference of when justice is done versus when earthly justice may be done. And so I think that's an aspect that a lot of people struggle with because you don't know when really to kind of step away and be like, earthly justice may not be done, but universal justice is. So I'm good with that. Or, oh man, I stopped just shy of getting the justice that I needed or the energetic justice. And now I got to do it all over again because I walked away too soon. And so I think that's where a lot of people struggle is knowing how do you know when you hit true justice versus crossing that line and losing justice.
So what we look at that part of the tree as well is judgment. So how you judge others and how you judge yourself. And everything that we look at on the tree is from the perspective of how you perceive that in the world around you, how you send that energy out, and also how you send that energy into yourself, how you judge yourself. And we judge each other all the time. You see it all the time. Oh, look what they're wearing, or look what this celebrity has done, or look what this decision this leader took. We're constantly judging, and we never have all the information. We never really know. We make judgments without being in receipt of all the facts. We can't possibly know all of the information. And so what we need to do is to say, okay, how would I judge myself? How would I judge myself if I was behaving like that? Or would I want somebody else to judge me in this same way? Or would I want somebody else to cut a bit of slack and be a bit more empathic and be maybe a bit more understanding? And so when a real injustice has happened to us, and we know that that was an injustice, and we can pinpoint it and say that person did something wrong, that's what they did wrong, it's evidenced, we know it. Then we have to say, okay, what is it in myself that has not, and this is where the law of attraction, I don't really gel with the law of attraction too much, because I don't believe that we attract everything that comes to us. So we'll probably touch on this again, but I think that there is an element of experiences that we have that may be predetermined or not predetermined, but I don't think that, sometimes crap happens. Sometimes we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? And it may be predetermined that we were supposed to experience that in this lifetime so that we can learn something. That doesn't change the fact that it hurts or that we've experienced something awful. But then it's a case of, okay, how far do I want to take that? Because we've all experienced something where we have an overreaction to something, and at the time it feels right. So a child is hurt, for example, or an animal is hurt. This gets people really like, oh, I could kill that person for doing that thing. It's really like, oh, that's the Mars in us. But then it's like, okay, we need to balance this with a bit more understanding, a little bit of the bigger picture. We've got to take a step back, because if we don't take a step back and increase our view and extend our horizon, then we're going to end up in prison, because we're going to take that justice, we're going to take that action, and then it comes back on us negatively. So everything in balance on the tree. We've got our justice and our judgment on this side. On this side, we've got mercy. And it's all about that balance, getting that balance between the justice and the mercy. Where do I forgive someone? Where do I forgive someone but keep my boundaries? Where do I forgive myself but keep my boundaries? It's always that balance. You don't want to be too forgiving and you don't want to be too judgmental of things. So yeah, there's always this energetic balance that we're following, and it's different for every person. So there's no blanket rule for anything that we study in Kabbalah. There are actually no wrong answers. So people that I've taken through have very different visions and aspects to me. My clients have very different views, sometimes politically different views, sometimes morally different views. And yet I'm able to still navigate things with them, even though they're different to me, because I get them to a point where I say, do you really, in your deepest part of yourself, do you really believe that? Do you really feel that? When you go really deep, do you really want to have justice on that person? Do you really want to do that yourself? Or do you want to be more logical? Do you want to get a lawyer in? Do you want to be more, think about it a bit more, take your time? Or do you want to just go ham and, go and hurt that person?
Right. And that's where I feel like the, system of justice we have being formed by the Code of Hammurabi, and everybody talks about how this is like the best code system that's ever been, and it's basically boils down to eye for an eye. Mm-hmm. But there's a fallacy in it, because like you're saying, if somebody murdered my family member, and in my rage I go and murder someone in their family line, it's going to keep going back and forth. There's never any justice, because it's a never-ending cycle of eye for an eye for an eye for an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people never saw is, yeah, it sounds good saying, yeah, if you steal something, something's going to be stolen from you, just, the scales are balanced. But they're really never balanced, because somebody is always feeling like, oh, you did this to us, even though we did it to you. You didn't have the right to do it back. And so we're going to now take retribution and do it back. And so that's what's interesting to me is, how do we ever really, sit down and go, what is justice? How do we even have a concept of justice? Because everything we've been taught about it doesn't make any sense, because in the end, somebody's always going to be seeking a retribution over it. And so in actuality, justice is never gotten.
Very true. And, this is why wars go on for centuries. because neither side then wants to back down, because, you know, they did this to me and the other party is saying they did this to me, you know, and it just goes on and on. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you with that. At some point, you know, at some point there has to be empathy. There has to be a level of, we need to come to an agreement. Obviously, each case is different, you know, and there are situations where it's very clear cut. What we have is a societal understanding of right and wrong. And we have that understanding of right and wrong baked into our laws, which is why we have, you know, something that's against the law and something that's within the law. And of course, those things vary from culture to culture. But it really always comes down to, you know, how much can you forgive, and understanding that it's okay if you can't forgive. This is something that's so important within this kind of work, is working in the light and in the dark, the light and the shadows. Because oftentimes people say to me, you know, I feel like a bad person because, and they'll say, you know, it'll be something like, I can't forgive someone, or I have all this anger in me or rage inside me. And often when we start to dig into it, it becomes apparent that there's a real reason for it being there. And sometimes it's just habit that somebody's so angry, or, you know, a cycle that somebody's been in for so long, they can't remember why they're angry. And then I say to them, why do you feel like this? Why do you feel so full of rage? And they can't answer me. It's not a particular injustice or a particular event that's happened. It's just become the way that they are because something happened at some point and it became their personality. So sometimes we look at these shadows and these darkness, these dark areas within ourselves and say, do I want to keep that? Is it useful to me? Because somebody who's full of rage, who has a position in their life where they're fighting for justice, where they are standing up for the underdog, where they are helping people that don't have a voice of their own, we need that rage in those people. They can't be placid and easygoing and you know, whatever. We can't have that in those warriors. We need those warriors. So this is why it's important to understand ourselves. We can do that through our astrological birth chart. We can see who we really are energetically and say, okay, this person is a fighter. We need them on the front line. Or this person is a teacher. We need them teaching. This person is a healer. We need them healing. And sometimes we can be a combination of those things. So again, it's understanding, what is your energetic makeup? What are you here to do? Truly, what are you here to do? And are you pursuing that thing? Are you actually walking that path? Or are you just stuck in a cycle? Are you stuck in something emotional that's happened to you? Or are you actually living out your true purpose? That's a real key part of this work as well.
Well, and I kind of feel like there has to be an element of all three, so to speak, in one. Because if you just let the warrior loose, you know, he could wipe out civilization and feel like, hey, I did my mission. I fought the fight. But he needs the healer and the teacher, you know, as the example to say, hey, we did the fight. We got back this territory that was in question. We're done. This is it.
Yeah. You don't have to kill everyone.
Well, what I mean is they know where to draw the line. They know where to say mission's accomplished and not, okay, now we got a new mission. Oh, now we got another mission and another mission. It's like, nope, these are not our missions. This is not our fight.
Yeah.
This is their fight, and let them handle it and we back out. And that's what I think is somewhat missing in the world today is, you know, everybody leans on somebody else to come in and fight their battles and then expects them to stay and fight. But when it's over, it's like, well, we're leaving. It's now up to you. And it's like, they're like, well, I don't know what to do. You know, all we know is this. So, you know, it's like, yeah, it's like we're handing the keys back to, we're going to be back in a decade maybe, because they're going to do the same patterns over because they don't know any different.
This is why we look at it on an individual level and on a world scale as well. So when you look at a society, you'll have people within that society who are brilliant at fighting, brilliant at healing, brilliant at science, brilliant at invention, brilliant, there's all these different talents that a group of people will have. You only need a group of 3 or 4 people and you're going to have quite a variety of energy there to work with. And when we understand the energy within us and what we do best, then we can work in those smaller groups, in those societal groups, whether it's a town, a city, a country, a continent, whatever it is, for the variety of those people to make that system work. And as you say, yes, somebody else can come in externally and say, hey, what's going on? You guys have gone off course. You really need to be doing this, and we're doing it like this over here. Don't you think that's better? So we'll always have that. We'll always have those opposing views and different ways to be. But when you break it down to the individual, and I think this is where it's so important for the individual to understand what they do best as well, and to balance those energies. Like I said, the Mars balanced with that Jupiter energy, that judgment and that fighting and that justice energy balanced with the mercy and the love and the teaching and the understanding of the bigger picture. Those things always have to be balanced. So even when we look at something as simple as our thoughts versus our feelings, all of that is within us. And yet we need to balance the thoughts and the feelings. We need the feelings to be working with the thoughts and the thoughts to be supporting the feelings. Everything has to be in balance. If the two are opposed, then you just end up a mess. You don't have anything under control and everything's going out of control. Everything in your life is going out of control. And so when we look at these things as individuals, but also as groups of people, you find that it works internally, externally, the microcosm, the macrocosm. It's all kind of a fractal, really.
I agree. And I kind of wonder if the realization of that is why, and what I'm about to say comes from my own personal viewpoint through experiences that I've seen and witnessed. And I'm not talking about general for everybody, but I have seen more soldiers now coming back from combat, even killed a little, I'm sure there's still some PTSD, but not to the scale of the Vietnam War and Persian Gulf and Korea, those wars where, they seen things that, they just couldn't wrap their minds around. And we had we only set them over there trained to fight. Where today's soldier, they're taught science, math, they're taught, philosophy and how to be a soldier. So I can't help but wondering if, because they're becoming more rounded, educated, that they're able to process and witness, some of the horrors and be like, man, this sucks, but if I look at it this way, I can go talk to this person and, there are people there, and there's not the stigma anymore really of, oh, you're going to the shrink, that's going to get you sent home and kicked out of the army. So nobody's going to do that because nobody wants to get sent home under that classification. And so I'm wondering if that's all of that is these new energies coming in and becoming what they were meant to be in the past, but now they're like, hey, we're actually being supported. And so it's changing what's going on in the world on that front.
Very likely. Very likely. The energy of the world is definitely changing. We've moved from what we call the so you've heard of the age of Aquarius.
Right.
So we go through different ages in the world, and we've moved from an age where it was kind of like the Christ age. So we had the Christ age where we were told that we could put our karmic debt onto something, like somebody would take our karmic debt for us and transmute that energy for us. That was the past age. The age that we're moving into now, the age of Aquarius, is the age of man, and it's where we are responsible for our own karmic debt now. So now we have more knowledge. We can't just turn to someone else and say, hey, take my sins for me. You know, it's not acceptable anymore. We know too much. We're too responsible. We know so much now. It's ridiculous what we know about the world and what's happening everywhere else. It's not just a family unit and our immediate village anymore. It's the entire world that we know about, and we don't always know the truth, but we know most of what's going on, much of what's going on, probably too much of what's going on. But it means that we no longer have the excuse to say, oh, but Christ will take my sins for me, so therefore I'm let off. I'm off the hook. Now it's, what do we do responsibly? What are we doing to look after our planet? What are we doing to look after ourselves? How do we develop ourselves to better people? How can we be the best people that we can be? How can we be the best family member? How can we be the best governor or teacher, or, you know, whoever you are in your local environment, whatever job you have? How can you be the best influencer? How can you be the best person who's bringing other people together? And then it goes bigger and bigger and bigger, because we're no longer just in that small environment that we were previously. Now we're global. And we have to understand the bigger picture better, and we have to take responsibility more for the health of the planet, for the health of ourselves, you know, and understand that we are just all human beings living on this rock, floating in space, you know, and we've got to move away from these old ways of being, because that's just not going to cut it anymore. There's no excuses anymore. And so I think that's the energy that's moving in. I think it's more conscious energy where we are saying, how can I be better? What can we do better? And how can we make our lives better? And of course, there are always the other people who don't seem to think that way. They seem to have their own agenda. They seem to have their own thing going on. And, you know, we're always conscious of, oh, okay, they're not quite working the way that we work, or, you know, those people who have got all that money, who are focused on going to Mars, or focused on creating AI, or whatever it is, you know. And it's kind of like, hang on, what about the people? What about the ground level? You know, we need to be more responsible now. And it's all part of the same thing, isn't it? I think it's that same energy that's moving through.
I would agree. And part of that too is, you know, we have people who have always been, you know, this is, you know, what we believe. And admittedly, one of the reasons, there were many, but this was one of the reasons why I left mainstream religion and the church, was the notion, like you're saying, you know, I could commit any crime I wanted, but before I cross over, if I take Christ as my savior, it's all wiped clean. I was like, that is complete and utter BS. It's not a free ticket to do whatever you want,
Right.
and you're saved right at the last minute. And it's like, yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. And so when they were touting that, I was like, yeah, I'm out. Because no, I'm like, I, even as a kid, I could never get behind that, you know, belief. And there were so many other like little nuances of, oh, you know, this is this and this is who this is. And I'm like, no, that doesn't work either because of this. And they're like, nope. And so I was like, it was too many contradictions, in other words. So I was like, yeah, I need to go do my own search. And that was one of the things where in the beginning, like I was saying, I wasn't so familiar with Kabbalism because I studied Islam. I studied, the books of Judaism, Christianity, the New Age, even did a term paper in college on it. And I was like, because those were the ones that I knew. I had never heard of Kabbalism. And I'm like, so when you brought that up, I was like, where was this? How did I never hear this? And now it's like, oh, I did hear of it. I just never knew what to call it. And so called it something else. And I,
Mm.
and I feel like that's what happens so often around the world is, everybody really is believing in the same thing. But because we get hung up in labels and names, that it's like, no, we can't get along because I'm fighting for this God. And they're like, well, I'm fighting for this God. And then you get the Kabbalist comes in and goes, you guys realize you're fighting for the same person. So you both are like either screwed or winning. So take your pick. And it's like, oh, it's like
Mm.
nobody wants to admit to that. Oh, we do
Mm.
believe the same thing in the
It's,
same person.
yeah, it's very much that. So there are different ways to spell Kabbalah. So I use the spelling with a Q. And the spelling with the Q is the Kabbalah that is okay with the astrology and the tarot. And it's an important difference between that and Kabbalah spelled with a K, which comes from the Jewish mysticism. So the Kabbalah spelled with a K won't be connecting with the Christ force energy, for example. Okay, so there are differences there. They tend not to use tarot as heavily as we do with the Q spelling. So it's important to make that differentiation. So when you look up Kabbalah, if you're coming across Kabbalah spelled with a K, that is the Jewish mysticism specifically. If it's spelled with a Q, that's the one that I'm doing, that is the sort of umbrella term of it. We both use the tree of life and connect with the tree of life as the main structure with what we're working with. But I think that having that structure, having that path to follow, having that sequence that you go through, it's not like, I mean, that you can go through grades and, sort of get those titles, but I don't think those are important. I think the important thing is the self-development through it, understanding the bigger picture, connecting spiritually. And some people say, oh, it's too scary, I don't want to connect with demonic energies, I don't want to experience scary things, isn't it unsafe, isn't it dangerous? A lot of people say that. Well, if you're not doing it in the way that it's laid out, in the order that it's laid out, then it can be dangerous because you're not always mentally prepared and spiritually prepared for certain experiences. So if I had started Kabbalah and I went straight into that Mars experience where I was, in this kind of situation where I had to deal with my Mars energy, if I hadn't have done years of work leading up to that, I would have really struggled with that. It could have broken me. So it's kind of like a mental thing. You grow in mental strength, you grow in spiritual strength as you work your way through the system, that it's laid out in a certain way. It's in a certain order so that it's like going to the gym. You're building your muscles as you go. You experience it slowly, gradually, bit by bit, step by step. You don't throw yourself into an extreme experience. You don't kind of go, oh yeah, let's go play with some demons today. It's really dangerous to do that kind of thing. What you want to do is build up to communing with energies and then decide. You can decide in Kabbalah what you want to experience. You can say, I want to connect with this angelic force, which is really just an egregore. It's really just a concept. It's an archetype. So I'm connecting with this energy that's an archetypal energy that deals with a certain topic. And I'm going to get my information. I'm going to get the knowledge. I'm going to get the help that I need, the real deep, impactful knowledge that energy is going to give me. And you can do it in a way where you can access your shadow side or stay in the light side. And people call that the demonic or the angelic side of the tree, the two sides of the coin, those two different energies. And you can work with either of those. It depends what you want to work with. It depends what suits you best. So you don't have to do anything, but you do want to approach it in a certain order and a certain process so that you don't break yourself mentally or spiritually as you go. So it's important, I think, to say that, because one of the main questions that comes up is it dangerous? Because people have got this view of it being working with demonic energies and this sort of thing. You don't have to do that if you don't want to do it, though.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have, kind of led an esoteric life and never knew that again was the term for it. And one person that I studied under for a while was Nassim Haramein, who taught that inside of everybody is a black hole in a universe within each individual. We're all a walking universe. And so I was like, okay, I get it. The energy's there. Okay. And then William Henry, I followed him for like 20 years and was friends with him. And he taught, oh, the Ark of the Covenant is this energy device. And lo and behold, it matches up with the chakras. It's inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're talking about, like, the tree of life being within us, I started looking and thinking to myself, well, what is the Ark of the Covenant? It's supposed to hold the power of God, is what they say. Well, wouldn't that be a black hole, so to speak? And so is the black hole, like that Nassim's talking about, being inside the Ark, which is powered by the tree of life. Could you say it that way? Or the key is the tree of life to this inner, but they're all connected, is what
Yeah.
I'm getting to.
Yeah, you could say that. So the center pillar of the tree. So we understand that the tree is within us and it represents the universe around us as well. So we can map ourselves onto the tree. So this would be our feet and the top circle would be just above our head. So in terms of when you talk about chakras, the center pillar down the center of the tree is very much similar in the idea of the chakras, also in the fact that the top of the tree of life, that top circle at the very peak of the tree, is really your crown chakra. So your crown chakra is opening up and you're communicating using your crown chakra. And then, you've got the other points of energy down your body. Of course, there are more than 7 chakras in total. But yeah, it's a similar energy. It's a similar idea that you've got the most spiritual at the top and then the most earthly connected to your feet at the bottom. Very similar. And when we talk about things like vibration, music, anything, I mean, color has a vibration as well. So this is why we have the specific colors that we use for each of the circles. It's the same energy. Energetically, it's the same feeling to it. And there are lots of exercises that you can do to practice feeling and sensing energy. You can get something as simple as colored card and just shuffle them up and close your eyes and then put your hand over and see what color you're sensing. So you start to get an idea that everything has a vibration. Everything has that pulse, that energetic force to it. And this is how we start to understand this within us. Incidentally, on the tree, there is this circle here, which is not always illustrated. And that represents the lack of knowledge or missing knowledge. And that could be described as a black hole. It could be described as the abyss, the sort of area that is that vacuum, if you like. So, yeah, it's all very interesting.
And I like how you mentioned color being through the vibration, because I have recently been looking at, things in our world, and I'm like, we take so many things for granted because And I always will use colors, like, saying the grass is green. Well, how do we know grass is green? Because that's what we've been told for centuries, and we just blindly accept it now that grass is green
Mm-hmm.
or brown if you don't water it. But either way, and I said this, and I was talking about this, and somebody goes, "Oh, well, it's actually green because it absorbs every spectrum but green, and that's what's reflected back." And I was like, "Okay," because I could question that too, but I was like, I only have so much time on this episode, so I was like, "Okay, yeah." But then I was like, "Yeah," and I had more time to talk about it. I was like, "Yeah, but how do we know that's what that frequency is?" And it's not a different color. Where when you're saying vibration, that makes more sense to me because you can match vibration to vibration. But to say, oh, well, this is this frequency, well, who determined that's what that frequency? So it's like you can always go back to there. We don't really know this answer.
We do know this. This is so good. This is such a good conversation to have, because the 10 circles on the tree of life represent 10 different energies. And I said there's a tree within each circle and it's infinite. Well, those are the different depths of that energy, right? So different vibrational depths of that energy. But when we look at things like, take for example, using herbs for healing, right? How do we know a particular herb heals a particular thing? It's thousands of years of use. It's thousands of years of practice. And how did people know back then? Well, they were more sensitive to the vibrations of things. So in Kabbalah, we love these 10 compartments that we can put everything into, because every plant fits into one of those 10 compartments. And when you look at herbal healing, the really old books, going back as far as you can, each herb has a planetary aspect to it. So they'll say, okay, something like cinnamon, for example, it's a little bit spicy, it's warm. So that's Mars. We're back again with the Mars and red and fire and passion and energy. Anything spicy is going to fit into that category. That's energizing, right? Ginger, it's energizing. It's giving us that heat, that warmth. It's because it works. Even in Eastern beliefs as well, you've got hot and cold, right? So we understand that some things, mint is really cold, right? It just feels cold. We can't explain why, but it's just cold. If you were to take a thermometer and hold it up to a mint plant, that's not going to be cold. It's just going to be the same as the temperature of the environment, right? But we understand that vibration, that flavor, that energetic blueprint of that thing to be cold. So when we're looking at things like herbal healing, it's because of the energetics. It's the energetics that works. And so to put things into what we call correspondences, what corresponds with what? And that's where we say, okay, so we've got this Mars energy, we've got the planet Mars. We know that's fighting. We know that's get up and go. It's your inner energy, your inner fire. It's your enthusiasm. It's your passion. It's all of those things. It is the blood. It is the iron. All of those things are connected with that energy. And then when we look at anything red, that's also categorized in that same space. Energetics. It's all the energetic vibration of what we're looking at. When you start to look at the world energetically, and at least these 10 categories and how everything fits into those 10, you can start to say, oh, that person has that particular energy predominantly, or that situation is that particular energy, or that object has that particular energy. And suddenly everything becomes clear. And when it comes to symbology, it's part of that whole idea of symbology where suddenly you understand so much better. And navigating life becomes much easier because you've pieced things together. You've understood that thing is that thing because of its energetic blueprint, and it matches something else. You start to piece together personalities, situations, events that happen, repeating patterns in your life, all of the things that you struggle with, even to do with health, to do with, where your thoughts are, what you're thinking, your creativity, your subconscious mind. Everything is governed by energetics.
So I started wondering, because some people are allergic to cinnamon, some people are allergic to like spicy food,
Mhm.
or their body doesn't handle that spicy food so well. And I've often wondered, what determines that? And listening in like what you're talking about and how it's all energetics. And I sit there and I go, well, if spiciness is like Mars, which is we'll call it technically the war energy, just for example, for this point, if someone is supposed to be learning peace, could that be why their body is allergic to the spicy food or can't handle the spicy food? Is they're not supposed to ingest that energy, that war
100.
energy, so they won't be able to eat spicy food.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. And so I mentioned earlier, Mars is really badly aspected in my chart. It's the worst planet for me. And so I can't handle spicy food. I don't even like it. It's painful to me. I don't like it. But my partner, he has Mars in Aries. He's all the Mars. He's all the fire. Every meal he has, he's putting on hot sauce and, doing all this. And it's because his Mars is in Aries. That's the sign that it's supposed to be in. Mars loves being in Aries. Aries is that, again, that fighting energy, that initiating force, that fighter that goes first. So it's like a double whammy of that energy. And so he loves all the spicy food. He loves all the fiery things, all of that kind of stuff. And, that's where we differ. And it's really interesting to look at our astrological charts and say, okay, this is where we're different to each other. And this is where we might argue. This is where we might come up against each other and say, oh, I'm this, but I'm this, and you can also, of course, see where you're compatible as well. But yeah, absolutely. That's the sort of thing that I look at somebody's chart and I can say 100% what food they like to eat. You can tell the experiences they like to have, whether they're an adventurous person, whether they like to stay at home. It's all baked in there.
Yeah, and the reason I was looking at that is because like there are certain spicy foods that I just cannot eat. Period. It's like I can't even handle the juice. Like if it was on the food, it's like no. I need a whole new dish. It's not as simple just remove because it's the juice as well. But there are some days though where, like, I'll be honest, I'll go to like Golden Chick. I don't know if you guys, I don't think you guys have Golden Chick, but you can get chicken tenders there, and they make them just flavorful as they are, or they put this dusting on that puts like burn your lips kind of heat to it, and you can get them half and half or all spicy, all original. And so I noticed there are days where it's like I'll hear myself and I'm like, why? And I'll say, hey, can I get half and half? And I'm okay with the heat, but I'll notice I'll eat the half that's spicy that day and not have leftovers, but I'll have the leftovers of the originals. And I wonder if, the body just needed that energy that day for something. And so it's like, hey, we'll get the fuel here. We got it. Now we're good to go. We don't need this anymore, so do not eat this again. Kind of mentality.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Also, you could look at where the planet Mars is on those days. So this is another thing that's interesting about astrology. It's not just about where the planets were when we were born, it's about what they're doing now. So, if you were to look at the sky now and you were to say, okay, at the moment Mars is in Aries, more people are going to be eating spicy food. But then if it's a day when Mars is in Cancer, then less people are going to be wanting those Martian experiences. It's very interesting. And this is how people are so general about astrology. When you see these TikTokers and, you know, people on social media, and they're saying, okay, so you're going to be feeling like this at the moment, especially if you're this sign, you kind of think, how can you be so general? But this is what I'm talking about, when waves of energy are hitting the planet. And we're feeling those waves of energy. We're feeling that Mars is in Aries that day, and everybody's short-tempered because Mars is in Aries that day. That's the energy that's hitting the planet. That's what we're working with. So you get these kind of periods of time where you can kind of say, as an astrologer, you can say, oh, okay, this is going on at the moment. I might want to watch what I say today because I could really upset people if I'm too honest. You know, today's the day to keep quiet and be extra kind and be extra nice. And then there'll be another day when it's kind of like, okay, today's the day I stand up for myself. Today's the day, you know, and that's that energetics again.
And yeah, and I don't mean to keep picking on food, but it's, my mind is curious because of certain scenarios. Like, I know people will say, I got ulcers because I ate too much hot food. But then I'll hear other people saying, oh, yeah, you know, you could cure the ulcer by eating hot food. So it's like, wait a minute. How does it do both? And is the fact of the ulcer that they were going against their body and going and, you know, consuming and, you know, getting into energies that they didn't need, and so the body is like, hey, we got to get you to stop, so we're creating this now, and that's where ulcers come from, or,
I
you know,
think
different ailments.
I think somebody with Mars in Aries would say, eat more hot sauce to get rid of the ulcer. Maybe, you know, somebody else might say, you know, you need to cool that down with something, drink some milk, or, you know, have something that has a cooling effect. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, so, you know, I can't comment on that. But we definitely have different energetic makeup, and it definitely manifests physically 100%. And it's interesting when you look at astrology and you start to recognize different features in people's faces. You know, so people with certain facial features tend to be certain signs or have certain planets in certain signs. And you start to recognize people and go, oh, that person's definitely a Scorpio. You can tell them a mile off they're a Scorpio, you know. And it's people are like, how can you tell? But it's energetic that has a physical manifestation of that energetics. And again, it's kind of like theory and proof. So the theory is there. Then it's up to you to see the proof, but to be honest about it, not to be, you know, oh, I want to believe that, so therefore that it must be true. But to look for evidence and to try to be scientific about the evidence. Now, I think that some people, maybe they react better to hot foods, to spicy foods. Maybe they would have a healing effect on those people in some way. And other people would be far worse if they were to continue to consume those types of things. So yeah, it's definitely an energetic thing. And I think it's really interesting that I think, you know, genetics plays into it as well. And that's always very interesting when you look at genetics and you look at physical makeup when it comes to genetics, but also energetically how things are passed down. Things like trauma, things like beliefs, you know, it's not always what you're taught. Sometimes it's an internal thing that you just have it in you. You know, a talent or an ability that you have within you can be passed down. So it's always interesting to look at these different things and say, where are the connections? And where is it that, for example, hot food for one person is detrimental, and yet hot food for another person is extremely good. And yet maybe you take that person's twin and they react differently. So why does the twin react differently? And there's something in there that's not quite the same, and you'll boil it down to the fact that they were maybe a few hours apart in time, and a fast moving planet has moved into a different sign or a different house during those few hours, and they have a different energetic makeup about them. So yeah, it can be very interesting.
Yeah, and we're at the hour and a half, but I wonder if you have time for another quick
Yeah,
question.
let's do it. Let's do another question.
So I wonder, because energetically we talk about star seeds, hybrids, and this and that, but I want to take it in a different route and go, can the zodiac be a hybrid? Can you be a hybrid zodiac? Because an example is I'm a water sign and I'm not near the cusp. So I don't have, like they say, if you're on the cusp, you can have the other sign that's near you. I'm not in that zone, but yet being water natured, I give off a lot of heat. And so I'm more of a fire element, even though I'm born in a water element. So I'm wondering, can you be hybrid zodiac sign even though you're only born under one sign?
So yes, you can. So it depends how many planets you have or which planets you have in that sign. So in your astrological birth chart, which is a snapshot of the sky at the time that you were born, taken from the place where you were born, it's just a photograph of the sky. We map where all the planets were in the signs. So you could have your sun sign could be Cancer, right? So that means you're a water sign. The sun was in Cancer when you were born, but you could have Mars, Mercury, any of the other planets, the moon, say, all in any other sign. They could all be in Pisces, which is another water sign, but a very different flavor of a water sign, right? Or all of those planets could have been in Leo, which is a fire sign. So you could have a very heavy fire chart because you've got more planets in fire signs, but your sun sign could be in Cancer. So you're saying your sun sign is in a water sign, but you could have a ton of other planets in fire signs, which gives you that heat, it gives you that hot water, that boiling water feeling. People who always have hot hands, warm hands, maybe they have that constant warmth about them all the time. They tend to have a lot of fire. My partner is one of these. He's got the Mars in Aries. He's got lots of fire in his chart. He's always warm. I can't understand it. And here's me, mostly air, so I'm always cold. My hands are always cold, my feet are always cold. My Mars is in Cancer, so I have this iron deficiency. This is how it all manifests. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. So yes, you can have lots of, we talk about the four elements here. You can have lots going on in the fire signs, but your sun could be in a water sign. So you've got that sort of lens that you see everything through, might be a water sign, but then you've got all this fire going on in the background.
And to piggyback on that, then, is like we had the cartoon that they made into the movie The Avatar, where he was master of all the elements. Can you have, planets in all four elements to where you are not all water, you're not all fire, you're not all air or all earth, that you actually have access to all those energies because you were born in such a way that they're all there?
You can be, but I have no earth in my chart whatsoever. So I am devoid of earth, no earth in my birth chart. So it's mostly air, little bit of fire, little bit of water, but zero earth. So there are no planets in earth signs in my chart. So when you have a chart like that, where you have a complete absence of one of the elements, that shows you where you need to focus in life. It shows you where you need to work a little bit harder. It doesn't mean that you're cursed or doomed to never be able to do anything earthly. It just means you have to work a bit harder at that thing, or it takes a little bit more effort to be able to do those things, or you naturally don't like doing earth type things. So earth is shopping, cooking, anything to do with money, anything to do with the day-to-day boring stuff. I find all of that stuff really difficult and really unpleasant to do. So I make sure I do those things when I get up. I do all my earth things, get all the earth out of the way so that I can spend the rest of the day doing the things I enjoy. I do my teaching, I do my, all the mental processes, all the logic stuff, dealing with my clients and doing all the fun things, learning stuff, all of that. So charts can be all, very heavily aspected to one or more of the elements and missing some. I haven't seen a chart that's missing 2 elements entirely. I think that's pretty unusual, but it is fairly common to be missing one entirely.
Okay, and so then I also wonder, like you're saying, with Earth missing, I view meditation and grounding as tied to the Earth. That's Earth energy. So would that be why some people don't meditate or don't always remember to ground, is because that element's missing?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your time, and I just want to say, in full transparency, we did have a hiccup in the timing for tonight's episode, because Cassandra is in the UK, so it is the wee hours of the morning there, and so we didn't realize until it was like the day of, or like a few hours the night before, that, oh my God, we got the times confused. So I just want to acknowledge to saying thank you for, sticking with it and honoring the time, even though we could have changed it. There was still time, but you didn't just disappear and say, oh, the time was, I was there on this time when I thought it was, and you weren't there.
No.
Like, what?
No. We agreed to this. I saw that when you put it out publicly, I noticed that you'd put it 8 p.m. your time. And I thought, you know what? It's gone out publicly that it's that time. It's cool. I will honor that time, and it's cool. So don't worry about it.
Well, I just like to acknowledge that, because that is a sacrifice. You're giving up sleep time. And so I just like to honor and say, I appreciate you doing that. And in future, we'll, be more clear on the time when we talk about it. And I also would like to give you a message, and that is from my heart and the heart of my shows to you. Thank you for what you're doing for humanity. It's seen, felt, heard, and appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, where can people find you if they have questions or want to delve into this path?
Right. So the best way to get started with learning this with me is on YouTube. So you will find me, Cassandra Raven, on YouTube, and I have a free mini course on there that is connected with manifestation and using the Tree of Life. And that is the best introduction to using the Tree of Life that you can possibly have. So you will get a result with that. You'll get into using the tree. You'll start to understand what it's all about. And that is, of course, completely free. And that is available on YouTube under Cassandra_Raven. And I have my website, which is cassandraraven.co.uk. And on there, you'll see all of my other offers and my tarot deck that I'm bringing out soon as well.
Okay. I always like to double check while I'm putting it out. Did I get that right?
Yep, that's right.
All right. So Thank you so much. And we hope to have you back on because I feel like there's so much more we can share with this and delve into.
Yeah, for sure. That would be great.
All right. Well, be sure to follow her YouTube channel and follow my YouTube channel because you never know when she'll be back on. We'll work on finding out when our schedules align. And with that, I'm going to say good night to everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And tomorrow, there's a special 1 hour episode of Riding Through the Unknown where Constance Victoria Briggs is coming on, and we're going to delve into the declassified UFO documents. So that's a special episode, so make sure you tune in for that. And if you have questions, bring them because, yeah, this is a once in a lifetime 1 hour time slot where we are diving into understanding what has been disclosed. And so, thank you again, Cassandra, for sharing your gift and your experiences with us. And I also want to say thank you for trusting me because I know we hadn't met before. And so there is often a trust factor of what is this podcast going to be like? And is this going to be what I think it is? Or are we going somewhere else? And so thank you for trusting me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, and with that, we are going to say goodnight, and I am going to go find the outro. And again, I also want to reiterate you had mentioned earlier loving the intro, and I didn't get a chance to say it then, but I will say now that that was my cousin who did that. And so I look forward to, he does my intro and outros and my little promo ads. And so we have fun collaborating on those. So he loves to hear that people love the videos. So thank you. And with that, we'll say goodnight, everyone.